Before we dive in, I'd like to ask a small favor. I'm pouring all my energy into reaching my goal of 1,000 subscribers, which means the world to me. Please, I'm asking you to hit that subscribe button. It's just a single click, but it gives me tremendous motivation to keep creating more videos. Thank you so much. I'll not pretend to love this woman. Nathaniel Harper stated it plainly at the altar, before the preacher had even finished the vows. He declared it to the entire county, then turned his back on his own bride. Grace Bennett, clad in a borrowed dress, simply stood there. She neither wept, nor fled, nor pleaded. She clasped her hands and lifted her chin. What that proud man failed to grasp, what not a single soul in that church comprehended, was that half the very ground he stood upon already belonged to her. If a story of quiet resilience is what you seek, subscribe and follow to the very end, and tell me in the comments what city you're tuning in from. I'll not pretend to love this woman. The words landed in the hushed church and seemed to echo down every pew. The preacher froze, mouth agape. "Mr. Harper, finish it," Nathaniel demanded. "Say the words. I'll answer them, but I will not stand here and allow this county to believe a lie. There is no love in this. This is a contract. Now, finish." Ezra Cole, the family lawyer, half rose from the front pew. "For God's sake, sit down, Ezra." The preacher turned to Grace, his hands trembling. "Miss Bennett, we can stop." "Go on," Grace instructed. Her voice did not falter. That was the first thing that struck everyone in the room, though most were too engrossed in staring at Nathaniel to truly register it yet. The bride, whose groom had just publicly humiliated her before 200 witnesses, had responded to the trembling preacher with a voice as steady as a placid lake. "Go on," she repeated. "He asked you to finish, so did I." The preacher swallowed and continued. "Do you, Nathaniel Harper, take this woman?" "I do." He directed the words at the wall. "Do you, Grace Bennett, take this man?" She waited until he looked at her. She refused to utter her response to his back. She waited, and the silence stretched. The county leaned forward, and finally, Nathaniel Harper turned his head, meeting the gaze of the woman he had just belittled. The silence offered him no alternative. "I do," Grace said, directly to his face, so that he would carry it. There was no kiss. In the third pew, a woman draped in plum silk was smiling. Victoria Collins, the governor's daughter, had attended the wedding anticipating amusement, and she had not been disappointed. They exited separately. That was the second detail the county observed. The bride and groom left the church down the same aisle, separated by 3 feet of empty air. At the door, Nathaniel veered right, towards the men, and Grace turned left, towards no one. The whispers began before either of them was out of earshot. Victoria intercepted Grace at the door. "Mrs. Harper?" She tried the title, her face contorting as if it had a bitter taste. "I couldn't leave without wishing you joy. Such joy. I've never in my life seen a groom so eager." She smiled thinly. "Tell me, did you know before today, or did he save it as a surprise?" "Know what, Miss Collins?" "That he doesn't want you." "He was very clear," Grace replied. "I have no cause to feel deceived." Victoria blinked. She had come to draw blood and found only cloth. "You're a cold little thing, aren't you? Most brides would be weeping in the vestry." "Would you like me to weep?" Grace inquired. "I could try, though I fail to see what it would gain me. A husband's love isn't bestowed upon the woman who cries the loudest. If it were, you would have him already, and we both know how much you've cried over Nathaniel Harper." The plum silk stilled. "Enjoy the wedding breakfast, Miss Collins," Grace said, and walked away. Behind her, Victoria Collins stood in the church doorway. Her smile vanished, her eyes narrowed to slits. A woman beside her murmured, "She has a sharp tongue, the governess." Victoria replied in a low voice, "She won't have it for long." It was a promise. Grace did not hear it, but it was made. The wedding breakfast was held at the Harper residence, and it was there, amidst the throng, that Nathaniel found his lawyer had cornered him by the window. "Do you have any idea what you've done?" Ezra Cole hissed. Half the men in this room lend you money, Nathaniel. Lend, present tense. You stood at an altar and announced to your creditors that your own marriage is a sham. A sham marriage creates an unstable foundation. Unstable foundations are called in early. You've given every note holder in this county a reason to tighten their grip by Michaelmas. I gave them the truth. The truth? Ezra laughed, devoid of any humor. The truth is you are 4 months from ruin, and the only thing keeping the banks at bay is the appearance of a settled man. You just incinerated that appearance in front of witnesses because your pride wouldn't allow you to utter a single gentle word to a governess. That's not truth, Nathaniel. That's vanity masquerading as honesty, and it's going to cost you everything your father didn't already lose. Nathaniel remained silent. Where is she? Ezra asked. How should I know? She's your wife. She's a contract. She's a contract you humiliated in front of the entire county, and if you had 2 cents worth of sense left, you'd go find her and start making amends. Because that woman is now the only thing standing between your name and the auction block, and you've given her every reason on God's earth to watch you drown. Nathaniel found her an hour later in the kitchen. He hadn't gone to make amends. He had gone because a footman, white-faced, had informed him that the new mistress was downstairs and the servants didn't know what to do with her. And a man does not allow his wife to wander his kitchens on her wedding day, contract or no. He paused in the passage, not entering. He listened. So you carry the tray high like so, not low. Grace was instructing. And you don't apologize when you set it down. A servant who apologizes trains the guests to find fault. You set it down as if it's the finest thing in the house because today, it is. What's your name? Sally, ma'am. How old are you, Sally? 14, ma'am. Can you read? A pause. No, ma'am. Would you like to? Nathaniel stood in the darkness of the passage, listening to his cold, arranged wife, the woman he had shamed at the altar less than 2 hours prior, spend her own wedding day teaching a frightened housemaid how to hold a tray. Something shifted within his chest, a sensation he did not welcome and could not identify. He stepped inside. The kitchen fell silent, the way a room does when the master enters uninvited. Sally clutched her tray. The cook stopped stirring. Grace, he said. Mr. Harper, you're wanted upstairs. You're the hostess. I'm aware. Then why are you down here? Grace set down the cloth she had been holding. Because upstairs, there are 200 people who watched you tell them you don't love me, and every one of them is waiting to see if I'll come up red-eyed and broken, so they'll have something to gossip about on the ride home. She looked at him steadily. I'll go up, but I'll go up when I choose, and I'll go up dry. Down here, at least the company is honest. Sally here has never once pretended to feel something she didn't. The cook made a small sound. Nathaniel's jaw worked. You could have wept, he said. The words emerged strangely, almost an accusation. In church, you could have wept, and I would have looked like a monster, and every soul in the county would have taken your part. Why didn't you? Because I don't perform grief for an audience that came to be entertained by it, Grace replied. And because a woman who weeps hands her entire heart to whoever made her cry. I will not hand you mine, Mr. Harper. You've made it abundantly clear you don't want it. She untied the apron she had somehow acquired. Now, I'll go be your hostess. Try to look at me at least once in the next hour. People are counting. She walked past him and ascended the stairs. The cook and the housemaid stared after her. Then the cook looked at Nathaniel, and there was something in the old woman's face he had never seen directed at him. It was pity. She pitied him in his own kitchen. And he understood dimly that it was not because he had married poorly, it was because he had married well and was too blind to recognize it. By nightfall, the last carriage had departed, and the house was his again, quiet and enormous, filled with the wrong kind of silence. Mrs. Doyle, the housekeeper, found Grace in the front hall. Your room is ready, ma'am. The east room. Good light in the morning. The old woman hesitated. She had managed the Harper house for 40 years and had never, in all that time, spoken her mind to a mistress. She spoke it now. I will not say the house is glad, ma'am, but I will say this. I have served 3 Harpers and buried 2, and I have never once seen a body take a wound the way you took yours today. Straight-backed, dry-eyed. You have the spine of someone twice your years. She paused. Whatever he is to you, ma'am, you are not nothing. I have decided it, and I do not change my mind. It was the first kindness Grace had received in that house, and it found its way in where all the cruelty had failed. Her throat tightened. She mastered it. Thank you, Mrs. Doyle. Tea would be welcome. Then, evenly, and the small trunk from my wagon, the locked iron one, was it carried up? Foot of your bed, ma'am. Heavy for its size. Books, is it? Papers, my father's. He was a lawyer. A lawyer? Mrs. Doyle turned the word over. Well, there are worse things to have in your keeping in a house bleeding money the way this one is than a lawyer's papers. She said no more. But the implication told Grace that Mrs. Doyle knew the accounts were failing, knew it the way servants always know, long before the master voices it. You know about the debts? Grace asked. I know the master has not slept a full night in 4 months. I know men come from Chambersburg and Philadelphia and leave with hard faces. I know the old master, God rest him, borrowed against this house twice over and told nobody, and it all came due at once when he died, like a dam breaking. The old woman's mouth thinned. And I know young Master Nathaniel would sooner cut off his own hand than admit to a soul he is drowning. That's the Harper sickness, ma'am. Pride. It's killed more of them than fever ever did. Grace was silent for a moment. Thank you for telling me the truth, Mrs. Doyle, she said. You'll find I'm a woman who rewards it. Bring the tea. She climbed to the east room alone. She shut the door. She turned the key in the lock. And she knelt at the foot of the bed, placing her hand flat on the lid of the iron trunk, the way another woman might have laid her hand on scripture. Then, she opened it. Deeds. Wrapped in oilcloth against the damp. She lifted the top one and unfolded it by firelight, though she did not need to read it. She knew it by heart. She had known it by heart since the night old Thomas Bennett, not the father who sired her and vanished, but the one who raised her, had pressed it into her hands with his dying grip and made her swear. Your mother left you more than a name, girl. She left you land. Half this county, nearly, tied up in old grants from before the war, hidden in a dozen names so no man could steal it while you were small. Nobody living knows. Not the banks, not a soul. And you are to tell nobody until the day you find a reason worth telling. Money bought and sold makes a person cruel, but land held quiet, held for the right reason, makes a person free. Wait for your reason, Grace. You'll know it when it comes. She had waited 3 years. She had taught other women's children their letters and eaten cold suppers in cold rooms, letting the whole county believe she owned nothing but a good gray dress and a level tongue. That afternoon, a proud man had stood at an altar and told the world she was nothing to him. She spread the deeds across the bed and read the shape of what she owned. The mill Nathaniel's father had mortgaged twice sat on a creek, and the creek ran through a parcel granted 40 years ago to a widow named Eleanor Vance, her grandmother. The bottom land promised to the Philadelphia lender bordered another parcel, and that one, too, ran back through a chain of quiet trusts to Eleanor Vance, to Eleanor's daughter, to Grace. The bridge. The road to the bridge. 3 of the tenant farms. The orchard Nathaniel walked of a morning to feel like a man of consequence. Half of it near enough, half of it ran back through paper to the governess he'd married, to cost him nothing and forbidden to speak. Grace sat back on her heels. He thought he'd wed a woman who owned nothing. He'd wed the one soul on earth who could save him, and shamed her at the altar not 8 hours past. She did not laugh. Something rose in her throat, and it was not laughter, a knock. She swept the deeds under the quilt in one motion, smooth as a card sharp, and had them hid before the door opened. Mrs. Doyle with the tea. You'll catch your death on that floor, ma'am. I was reading my father's papers. Grief that. I know it, the old woman poured. Drink that down, and I'll say one more thing, and then I'll leave you be. She handed Grace the cup. You asked me for the truth, and I gave it. So, I'll ask you for a bit in return, and you tell me, or don't, as you please. You're no ordinary governess. I've served ladies born to it who couldn't take a blow the way you took one today, nor speak to that Collins woman the way I hear you did at the church door. Who are you, ma'am, truly? Grace looked up at her, and for the space of a breath she was tempted. Tempted to tell this one honest woman the whole of it. She didn't. The pot wasn't worth taking yet. I'm a lawyer's daughter, she said, who learned young to guard her heart and count her cards. That's all you need of me tonight, Mrs. Doyle. But it's true, every word. I'll not lie to the one person in this house who didn't lie to me. Mrs. Doyle held her eyes a moment. Then she nodded slow. That'll do, she said. That'll do, ma'am. And she left the tea in the fire, and for the first time something better than tea, the beginnings of a loyalty that could not be bought, only earned. Grace sat up half the night with the deeds spread beneath her quilt like a hand she would not play until the pot was worth the taking. No, the days that followed taught Grace the shape of the house and the temper of the man who owned it. Nathaniel rose before light, rode out to the farms, came home at dusk with dust on his boots and his jaw set, and spoke to his wife only what a contract required. Good morning. The Vances call Sunday. You'll receive them. He passed her in the halls like a man passing a portrait of an ancestor he did not much admire. Grace let him. She kept the house. She learned the servants' names and their troubles, which is the quickest road into a household for servants. Know everything and forget nothing. She learned the cook's boy was down with a fever, and no coin for the doctor. She sent for the doctor herself, quiet, and paid him from a purse Nathaniel didn't know she carried, and told the cook it was the master's kindness, so the woman would think better of a man who hadn't earned it yet. She kept teaching Sally her letters an hour each evening. And she found the theft. It happened over the household ledger. Mrs. Doyle kept the kitchen books, and one evening the two women bent their heads together and Grace's finger stopped on a column. Here, the grain, 14 cents in the spring. 14 again. Then 19. And it stays at 19 clear through the summer. Summer prices, ma'am. It climbs when it's dry. It climbs if the roads are open, but the road to the Miller place washed out in June. Sally's uncle broke a wheel on it, she told me. So the grain came round by the long road. And the long road runs past whose land? Mrs. Doyle frowned at the page. The Collins land. And someone on the Collins land is charging 5 cents a load to cross a stretch of public road quiet and calling it a summer price. This house has paid it all season without knowing. Grace closed the book. It's not a price, Mrs. Doyle. It's a hand in the till, and I'd wager the hand belongs to the same family that came to my wedding to enjoy it. Mrs. Doyle sat back and stared. How in the Lord's name did you see that in a row of figures? Because my father taught me a lie always leaves a number behind, Grace said. A man can hide his reasons. He can't hide his arithmetic. Every wrong done for money shows up in a ledger in the end, if you're patient, and you know where the sums stop making sense. You, said Mrs. Doyle slowly, are wasted keeping linens. Grace only smiled and did not say how wasted or at what. Victoria Collins came calling Thursday as her kind do, uninvited, unannounced, filling up the doorway as though the house were still what it had been before the ledgers turned black. She found Grace in the front hall, and she'd come this time having done her work first. Mrs. Harper? The plum silk again, a different gown, the same poison. I've come as a friend, truly. Because a friend tells you what your enemies are saying, and oh my dear, they're saying such things. Are they? They're saying you've a purse of your own. Victoria let it land and watched. That you send for doctors and pay them from money no one can account for. That the master's own wife has coin she keeps hidden from her husband, and where would a penniless governess come by hidden coin? People do talk so. Some are saying you're stealing from the household. Some are saying worse, that you came into this house with secrets, and a woman with secrets and money is a woman with a past she's paying to keep buried. Grace's face did not move. But something in her had gone very still. Because Victoria Collins had put her finger blind and by malice alone within an inch of the truth. And who's saying all this? Grace asked. Oh, everyone. I couldn't name one soul, Victoria smiled. But I did think you should know before it reaches Nathaniel's ear. It would grieve me so to see it reach his ear. A husband who already doubts his wife's heart hearing. She keeps a secret purse. She spread her hands. Well, you see how it might go. And Grace understood in that instant exactly what had happened. Victoria had gotten to a servant. Someone in this house had told her about the doctor, the purse, the coin, and Victoria had taken that one true thread and was already this very week weaving it into a rope to hang her with. It was not a thread anymore. It was a thing done. "Thank you for your friendship, Miss Collins," Grace said, and her voice was smooth as milk over iron. "I'll treasure it. And since we're being such friends, let me give you something in return. Free as friends do." She stepped closer. "You paid someone in this house to carry you a tale. I don't yet know who, but I will before the week's out because a bought servant always spends the coin, and spent coin can be traced. And when I know—" She smiled and it did not reach her eyes. "I'll not turn them out, I'll keep them. A servant who can be bought once is the most useful thing in a house, Miss Collins. If the mistress knows they're bought, they carry back exactly what she wants carried. You've just handed me a window into your own parlor, and you don't even know which one it is." She stepped back. "Will you take tea, or have you finished doing me favors?" The hall was very quiet. Victoria Collins had come to plant a knife and been shown calmly that the knife was already in the other woman's hand and pointed the wrong way. She had never in her life been answered like this. Poor women were meant to be afraid of her. This one was doing arithmetic on her. "I'll speak with Nathaniel," she said, and her voice had lost its sweetness. "He's not at home. You may wait if you like." Grace turned toward the kitchen. "I'll see to the tea myself. I find I don't mind the kitchen." But Nathaniel was at home. He'd come in the side door, and he'd heard the last of it. Heard a governor's daughter accuse his wife of theft and hidden money and a buried past, and heard his wife answer it without one raised word, turning the whole attack inside out until the attacker stood disarmed in his front hall. He stepped into the passage. "Miss Collins," Victoria spun. "Nathaniel, you'll not come to my house and call my wife a thief." He said it quietly, and the quiet was worse than shouting. "I don't care what tale you've been told or who told it. Grace Harper keeps my house honest and my servants fed, and she's not touched a dollar that wasn't hers to touch. And if I hear this story of a secret person in the county from anyone, I'll know where it started. And so will your father, because your father borrows from the same men I do, and neither of us can afford a scandalmonger for a daughter." He opened the door for her himself. "Good day." Victoria looked at him. She looked at Grace. She saw with a fury that whitened her face that the thing she'd come to break had in the breaking drawn the two of them onto the same side of a line for the first time since the altar. "You'll regret this," she said very low to both of them. "I don't lose gracefully. Remember, I said so," and she was gone. The door shut. The hall was still. Nathaniel turned to Grace. "Is it true the purse? The doctor?" "Yes." He hadn't expected the plain yes. "Where does the money come from?" "From my father. He left me a little, enough to pay a doctor when a woman's child is dying and her master hasn't noticed." She met his eyes. "I told the cook it was your kindness. I lied to her. I let her think better of you than you'd earned because she needed a master she could love and you weren't giving her one. If you'd rather I hadn't, I'll tell her the truth tomorrow." Nathaniel stood very still. "No," he said at last. "Don't tell her." His voice had gone rough. I'll try to earn it, what you said of me." He looked at her, and it was the third time in their marriage he'd truly looked. And this time, he did not look away. "You defended me just now, to Victoria. You could have let her poison me against you and looked to me to sort out my own doubts. Instead, you turned her at the door and left me nothing to do but agree. Why, I gave you cause enough to let me drown because I don't fight the way you'd have me." Grace said, "You wanted a wife who'd weep, or a wife who'd rage, or a wife who'd run to you for rescue. I'm none of those. I fight quiet, and I fight to win, and I don't waste a good enemy's mistakes on spite." She paused. "And because whatever's between us, this house is drowning, and I'd sooner it didn't. That's all." "That's not all," Nathaniel said slowly. "A woman who owned nothing wouldn't fight to save a house that isn't hers. She'd let it sink and walk away lighter. You fight like you've got something in it." His brow drew down. "What have you got in it, Grace?" For one long moment, Grace said nothing at all. He'd asked the true question, blind like Victoria and by instinct, but he'd asked it. "What have you got in it?" And the honest answer was under her quilt, wrapped in oilcloth, half his county and the power to save or sink him with a word. "A promise," she said. "I made a promise to a dying man to use what he gave me well, and not before the right day. That's what I've got in it, Mr. Harper. Now you'll want your supper. It's late." She left him standing in the hall with a question half answered and a wife he no longer understood in the least, and she climbed the stairs to the east room and she locked the door. That night she wrote 2 letters. The first was to a lawyer in Chambersburg. Her father had trusted a man named Ezra Wickham, who owed old Thomas Bennett a debt of loyalty deeper than any money. She wrote that his old friend's daughter had need of him quiet, and he was to tell no living soul. She wanted, before summer's end, to know exactly which debts pressing on the Harper estate were tied to land, and which of that land ran back through the trusts her father built to a widow named Eleanor Vance. She meant to buy. Quiet through his office in names that were not hers, the abandoned parcels, the neglected farms, the mortgaged mill one at a time before the Philadelphia lenders could close their fists. So that when the county went to be broken up and sold off, the one buying up the pieces unknown to every soul, including her own husband, would be the flower-dusted governess he'd shamed at the altar and forbidden to touch his land. The second letter she did not send. She only wrote it to steady her own hand. It was to Victoria Collins, and it said one line, and then she held it to the candle and let it burn. "You brought a true thing into this house to do me harm, and true things are the only weapons that cut both ways." She watched it curl to ash. Then she took up the first letter, the one that mattered, and sealed it and held it to the light. Below her, a proud man lay awake for the first time, not thinking of his debts, but of his wife, of a woman who took a wound dry-eyed and defended him with no cause, and thought a governor's daughter to a standstill in his own front hall, and who carried, he was certain now, some secret heavy as an iron trunk. Across the county, a governor's daughter lay awake too. Her pride bleeding, swearing to herself that she would find the poor governess's secret and cut her open with it, whatever it took and whoever she had to buy. And in a small east room with good morning light, a governess who owned half the ground they all slept on sat with a sealed letter in her hand and her father's voice in her ear. "Wait for your reason, girl. You'll know it when it comes." And knew, with a calm that ran clear to the bone, that the reason had come at an altar that morning, dressed as an insult, and that she was done waiting. She set the letter where Mrs. Doyle would find it and post it with the morning things, no questions asked. She put the deeds back in the iron trunk. She turned the key. Then Grace Harper lay down in the house that was hers and not hers, shamed by a husband just beginning to see her, hunted by a woman who'd sworn to open her like a letter holding a secret worth half a county. And she closed her eyes, and for the first time since a proud man had turned his back on her at the altar, she slept the deep and dreamless sleep of a soul that has finally, after long, cold years, found something worth the whole of its strength. The house was quiet, and underneath it all, quiet as roots, the thing that would save Nathaniel Harper and undo every soul who'd wronged his wife had already, that very night, been set into motion by the one person he had forbidden to move at all. The letter went out with the morning cream and the eggs, tucked among Mrs. Doyle's marketing list, and no one who saw it thought a thing of it. That was how Grace meant everything to move now, folded in among the ordinary, unremarked, until the day it could not be unremarked. She came down to breakfast, dry-eyed and level as ever, and Nathaniel was already at the table, and he did a thing he had never once done. He stood when she entered. Grace stopped in the doorway. "Sit," she said. "You needn't." "I know I needn't." He sat back down, stiff, as though the standing had cost him something, and he wasn't sure he'd meant to spend it. "It's what a man does when his wife comes in. My father did it for my mother every morning of his life. I've not done it once for you. I thought I'd start. 23 days late." 23 days late, he agreed. "You're keeping count." "I keep count of everything, Mr. Harper. It's the only thing I've ever owned in surplus." He almost smiled. She saw him almost do it, and saw him decide not to, and thought that a man who was learning to smile at her again was a man she'd have to be careful of, because a fortress that opens its gate to be friendly has lost the one advantage a fortress has. "I'm riding the South Farms today," he said. "The Miller place, the 2-tenant holdings past the creek. There's trouble with the rents. I mean to sort it." "What kind of trouble?" "The kind that isn't your concern." He said it, then heard himself say it, and something crossed his face. That came out the old way. "I'll try again. The tenants can't pay. The season's been hard, the road washed out, grains dear, and they're behind. My steward says I should turn out the two who are furthest in arrears, and let it be a lesson to the rest." He rubbed his jaw. "I don't like it. But the banks are counting my rents same as I am, and a landlord who can't collect is a landlord who can't borrow, and a landlord who can't borrow is finished. So, you'll turn out 2 families to show the banks you're a serious man. I'll do what keeps the roof over all our heads, mine and yours and Doyle's and the girls you're teaching to read." His voice had an edge now. "You think me hard. Ride out and see hard. See what it is to owe more than the ground's worth and have men in Philadelphia deciding whether you eat. Take me with you." He blinked. "What?" "To the South Farms. Take me. You said I mustn't touch the land, and I've touched nothing, but you didn't say I mustn't look at it. And I'd like to look at it before you turn 2 families off it. If I'm to be mistress of this house, I should at least know the faces of the people we're ruining to save ourselves. It's no place for... If you say it's no place for a lady, I'll remind you that you told a full church I'm no lady, only a governess. And a governess has stood in cold rooms all her life and won't melt at the sight of a poor farm." She was already tying her bonnet. "I'll ride behind you and say nothing and touch nothing. You have my word, but I'm coming." Nathaniel looked at her a long moment. "You are," he said slowly, "the most contrary woman I have ever had the misfortune to marry. I'm the only woman you've ever had the misfortune to marry. That's my point." And this time he did smile briefly before he caught it. "Get your gloves. We ride in 10 minutes, and I'll not wait on a lady's on a governess's vanity." She was down in 8. The Miller place, when they reached it, was worse than his steward had let on, and Grace saw it the moment they rode up, because she'd been trained her whole life to read a thing by the state of its accounts, and a farm's accounts are written all over its fences. "Look at the barn roof," she said quietly, riding beside him. "What of it?" "It's newly patched, cheaply patched, but patched. A man who's given up doesn't patch his barn. A man who patches his barn in a bad year is a man still fighting. You'd be turning out a family that hasn't quit to teach a lesson to families who'll quit the day they see you'll do it." Nathaniel said nothing, but he looked at the barn roof. The tenant came out. His name was Amos Reed, and he was a wide, ruined-looking man of 50, with hands like split leather, and he came out already braced because a landlord riding up unannounced in a bad season means one thing, and every farmer knows what it is. "Mr. Harper." Reed took his hat off. He didn't put out his hand. A man who expects to be turned off his land doesn't offer his hand. "I know why you've come. I'll not make you say it. Give me till first frost and I'll..." "Amos." A woman's voice from the doorway. Reed's wife, thin as a rail, with a baby on her hip and 2 more children hanging at her skirts. "Amos, don't beg him. Don't you dare beg him." She looked at Nathaniel with a hatred so clean and so tired it had gone all the way past anger into something like grief. "Turn us off then. Go on. My grandfather cleared this ground for your grandfather. My husband's broke his back on it 30 years. Turn us off in July with 3 babies and let the county see the kind of man you are. We'll go. We'll go. And God can sort out the account between us. Because I surely can't." Nathaniel's jaw was tight. His steward's voice was in his ear. "Turn out the 2 furthest behind. Let it be a lesson." And here was the lesson. Standing in a doorway with a baby on her hip, and it turned out the lesson had a face, and the face was looking at him like he was already damned. Grace did not touch the land. She'd given her word, and she kept it. but she had not promised to hold her tongue, only her hands, and there is a great deal a clever woman can do with a tongue and no hands at all. "Mrs. Reed," she said, "how much is owed?" Everyone looked at her. Nathaniel most of all. $40, Reed said, unsure who this woman was. "And some 2 seasons. And what would you make on the fall harvest if you kept the ground and the weather turned, $90, $100 if the corn came good?" Reed's brow furrowed. "Ma'am, who?" "So, you'd owe $40, Grace said, "against $100 coming in October. A man doesn't turn out a debtor who'll pay him $100 in October over a $40 debt in July. That's not hardness. That's not even sense. That's a man cutting off his harvest to spite his ledger." She turned to Nathaniel, and her voice stayed perfectly even, perfectly mild, so that it did not sound like a wife instructing a husband in front of his tenant. It sounded like a woman thinking aloud. "It seems to me the question isn't whether the Reeds can pay, it's whether they can pay in July or in October. And it seems to me a landlord who needs to show the banks a paying estate would rather show them $100 in the fall than an empty farm and a scandal in the summer." The silence stretched. "Wait here," Nathaniel said to the Reeds, and swung down off his horse and drew Grace a little apart, out of earshot. And his voice, when it came, was low and furious, and not quite as furious as he wanted it to be. "You gave me your word, you'd say nothing. I gave you my word I'd touch nothing. I've touched nothing. You know what I meant. I know exactly what you meant. And I know exactly what I said. And they weren't the same thing. And you're a man who ought to have learned by now to listen to precisely what I promise." She looked up at him. "Are you going to turn them out?" "I don't. Because if you are, do it now, quick, while she's braced for it. Don't make that woman stand in her doorway another minute waiting to learn if her children sleep under a roof tonight. Whatever you decide, decide it kindly, and decide it fast. Cruelty's bad enough. Slow cruelty's—" Nathaniel looked at her. Then he looked back at the doorway, at the thin woman and the baby and the 2 children in the dirt, and Grace watched something happen in his face that she had not seen there before. And she understood that she was watching the exact moment a proud man's pride cracked far enough to let a little mercy through. Not because she'd argued him into it, but because she'd made it so he could do the merciful thing and still tell the banks it was sense. He walked back to the Reeds. "You'll pay in October," he said. "The full arrears out of the harvest, and this year's rent besides. If the corn fails and you can't, you'll come to me before you sell a stick or a beast, and we'll settle it between us like men, and not like a landlord and a debtor. But you'll not be turned off in July with 3 children, not off Harperland. Not while I hold it." He put his hat back on. "That's all." Amos Reed did not say anything. He couldn't. His face had gone to pieces, and he turned half away so the master wouldn't see it. His wife saw everything. She always had. She looked at Nathaniel, and then she looked hard and long at the quiet woman on the horse who'd done the thing with words that her husband couldn't do with begging. And she said, "You're the new Mrs. Harper, the governess." "I am. They said at church he shamed you at the altar. Said he told the whole county he didn't love you." "He did," Grace said. Mrs. Reed nodded slowly, taking the measure of it. "Well," she said, "he's a fool then, and I've never once in my life felt sorry for a Harper till this minute." She shifted the baby on her hip. "You come see me again, Mrs. Harper, when your husband's not by. There's things a woman knows about this county that a man will never be told, and I reckon you're a woman who likes to know things." "I am that," Grace said. "I'll come." They rode home mostly in silence. It was near the gate that Nathaniel finally spoke. "You did that on purpose." "Did what?" "Made it so I could keep them and still call it sense. So I wouldn't have to choose between mercy and the banks. You built me a door and walked me through it and let me think I opened it myself." Grace looked straight ahead. "And if I did? Then you're either the kindest woman I've ever met or the most dangerous, and I can't for the life of me tell which." "Why not both?" Grace suggested. "A kind woman with no power is merely a victim who smiles. A dangerous woman with no kindness is just your Miss Collins. It's the combination of the two that should make a man uneasy." She turned her head and looked at him. You should be a little worried, Mr. Harper. It'll do you good. He laughed then, a genuine surprise erupting from him, the first real laugh she'd ever heard. The sound of it did something to the fortress she'd built around her heart, something no cruelty had managed. She turned her face away so he wouldn't see it, and sternly told herself that a woman playing for half a county couldn't afford to be undone by a man's laugh. But she'd heard it, and she couldn't unhear it, and that was the trouble. Ezra Wickham's answer arrived 4 days later, tucked once more into Mrs. Doyle's marketing. Grace read it, locked in the East Room with her back against the door, and what it revealed turned the whole game upside down. "My dear Miss Bennett, Mrs. Harper," it began. "I must learn to write. Your father's daughter to the bone, and I'd have known your hand anywhere. I have done as you asked, quiet as the grave. The Harper debts run deeper than the county dreams. But here is the thing you'll want to sit down for. The largest single note against the estate, nearly $11,000, secured against the mill, the bridge, and the whole of the eastern bottomland, is held not by any Philadelphia bank. It was bought up this spring, quietly, through 3 intermediaries, by a party who wishes not to be named. I have spent considerable effort learning who, I am now certain. The note that will sink Nathaniel Harper the moment it's called is held by Governor Collins. Which is to say, in every way that matters, by his daughter." Grace read it twice. Then she sat very still on the floor of the East Room, her back against the locked door, and she understood with a cold clarity that ran all the way down to the true shape of the thing she was standing in the middle of. Victoria Collins had not merely wanted to marry Nathaniel. She had bought the debt that could destroy him. She was not a rival. She was the executioner, holding the rope, waiting only to decide the day. Every honeyed threat, every visit, every planted rumor. None of it was jealousy. It was a woman toying with a man she already owned, biding her time until she could stand over his ruin and offer him, from the wreckage, the one hand that could pull him out. "Marry me, and I'll tear up the note. Refuse me, and I'll call it and take everything." That had always been the game. Grace had simply been an obstacle dropped in the middle of it, a governess Nathaniel had married for cover, blocking the endgame. Which meant Victoria didn't merely dislike her. Victoria needed her gone. "Lord," Grace whispered to the empty room, "it's not a rivalry at all. It's a foreclosure with a wedding attached." She got up. She spread the deeds on the bed and did the arithmetic she'd been raised to do, the cold and total kind, and it came out clean and terrible and full of hope all at once. Because here was the thing Victoria Collins did not know, could not know, that not one living soul but Grace and an old lawyer in Chambersburg knew the mill, the bridge, and the eastern bottomland. The very 3 things pledged against that $11,000 note sat on ground that ran back, through the trust old Thomas Bennett had built, to Eleanor Vance, to Grace. Victoria held a note secured against land that its own borrower had never fully legally owned to pledge. The rope Victoria meant to hang Nathaniel with was tied off on Grace's own fence post. Grace sat down and wrote to Wickham that same hour. She wanted every intermediary's name. She wanted to know if the note could be bought back, and at what price, and by whom, and how quietly. And she wanted him to begin carefully, in names not hers, purchasing the smaller debts, the tenant arrears the banks had written off, the mortgaged mill, the neglected parcels going cheap in a hard summer. She would not go for the throat first. She would take the county out from under Victoria, 1 quiet acre at a time, until the day the governor's daughter reached for the rope and found Grace already holding the other end. She sealed the letter. She realized she was no longer merely surviving a bad marriage, she was at war, and for the first time in 3 years, the fortress she'd built around her heart had a use beyond keeping the cold out. It had become a fort she could fight from. She was smiling when she came down to supper, and Nathaniel noticed. "You look pleased," he said. "I had good news from an old friend," she replied. "What friend?" "A lawyer of my father's. He writes to me now and again." She spread her napkin. "He says I've my father's hand and my father's head, and that I should have been a man, for I'd have made a fearsome one. He's not wrong about the head." Nathaniel studied her. though I'm glad enough you weren't made a man. A man couldn't have talked me out of turning off the reeds. I'd have knocked a man down for trying. He said it lightly, then less lightly. I rode past there again today. Amos Reed's got his whole family and both his brothers in that cornfield, working it like the devil's behind them. He told me. He made me stop and hear it. He told me he'll pay in October, if he has to sell his own arm to do it, because a man who's shown mercy will move heaven to prove the mercy right. Nathaniel turned his glass in his fingers. I didn't know that about people. I thought fear got more out of a man than mercy. My stewards always told me fear gets more. He's wrong, isn't he? He's wrong, Grace said quietly. Fear gets you a man's labor. Mercy gets you his loyalty. And when the hard year comes, and it always comes, labor runs and loyalty stays. Your steward manages your fields like a man wringing out a rag. You'll get more from this land in kindness than he's got from it in 30 years of squeezing, and you'll get it in a form the banks can't seize, because you can't foreclose on a county that loves you. Nathaniel was quiet a while. Where were you? He said at last. For the first 34 years of my life, I could have used you. Teaching other men's children their letters, Grace said, and waiting. Waiting for what? For a reason, she said. Now, eat your supper, Mr. Harper. It's going cold and Mrs. Doyle takes it personal. But the war did not wait for her to finish arranging her pieces, because Victoria Collins was not a patient woman, and she had noticed, even through her own arrogance, that something had shifted in the Harper house. Nathaniel was not drowning fast enough. He was not coming to her hat in hand, ready to be saved. And a bought servant had carried her a new tale, that the master and the governess were riding out together and laughing over supper. And Victoria Collins had not spent a summer laying a rope to watch a governess untie it. So, she came again. And this time, she did not come alone. And she did not come to Grace. She came to the county. It started at church. Grace felt it the moment she walked in. The small silences that fall in a certain way, the heads that turn a certain degree, the neighbors who found somewhere else to look. Mrs. Doyle felt it too, and gripped Grace's arm at the door. Something's amiss, ma'am, she muttered. I've been going to this church 60 years. That's the way folk look when they've been told a thing about you. They had been told a thing. Grace learned what it was from the Reed woman who crossed the whole churchyard to reach her, her thin face set hard. You'll want to know what's going around, Mrs. Reed said without preamble. So I'll tell you, because you were straight with me, and I'll be straight with you. They're saying you're not who you claim. They're saying the governess business is a lie, that you came into this county under a false name, that there's a husband somewhere you never buried, nor divorced, that Nathaniel Harper's married to a woman who's already another man's wife, and that when it comes out he'll be ruined for it. Bigamy, they're calling it. In whispers. All over the county, by Wednesday. She held Grace's eyes. It come from the Collins house. Everybody knows it come from the Collins house, but knowing where a lie comes from's never once stopped it traveling. Grace did not so much as blink, but inside the fortress, it rang like a struck bell. Because Victoria had done it again, taken a true thing and bent it, Grace did have a hidden past, not a husband, a fortune. But a woman with a real secret cannot laugh off an invented one, because the very act of defending herself against the lie risks flushing the truth. If she protested too loudly, if she opened her history for the county to inspect, to prove there was no husband, someone patient enough might find the deeds, the trusts, the name Eleanor Vance. Victoria had thrown a false accusation shaped exactly like the true one, so that Grace could not fully clear herself without exposing what she was hiding. It was, Grace thought with something almost like admiration, a genuinely clever piece of cruelty. "Thank you, Mrs. Reed," she said. "You're a good friend to me, and I don't have many, and I'll not forget it. What'll you do?" "I don't know yet," Grace said honestly. "But I'll not do it here, in the churchyard, in front of her friends. That's what she wants, for me to make a scene and hang myself with it. I'll go in and sing the hymns and shake the reverend's hand and let them all watch me be calm. A calm woman is a hard woman to burn. It's the ones who run who look guilty. She went in, she sang the hymns, she shook the reverend's hand. And she felt every eye in the county on the back of her neck, and she did not give them one thing to talk about on the ride home, and it cost her more than any soul in that church would ever know. But Nathaniel had heard it too. He heard it from his lawyer, Ezra Cole, who caught him outside the church, his face gone gray. "Nathaniel, a word, now before you take her home." Cole pulled him aside. "You've heard what they're saying." "I've heard." "Is it true?" "Is what true?" "That my wife's a bigamist?" "Don't be a fool, Ezra. I'm asking what you know of her. What do you actually know, Nathaniel? Where's she from? Who were her people?" "You married a governess with no family to make demands." Those were the very words. No family, no history anyone could check. A blank, voice dropped, urgent. "I'm not saying it's true. I'm saying you can't prove it's false, because you know nothing about her, and a man who knows nothing about his own wife can't defend her. And a man who can't defend his wife against a bigamy charge is a man the banks will drop like a hot coal the moment it suits them. This isn't about her honor. This is about your credit. If the county believes your marriage is void, every note you hold comes due at once." Nathaniel stood very still. "So, what do you counsel?" he said, and his voice had gone dangerous. "Set her aside." Cole said it fast, before his nerve failed. "Quietly. There's talk enough of annulment already. Let it work for you. Send her off with a little money. Let the county think you discovered the truth and acted honorably. And Nathaniel," he urged, "hear me. Go to Victoria Collins before the month's out. She's wanted you for years. Her father holds paper you can't cover. Marry the governor's daughter, and every debt in this county turns friendly overnight. It's the only move on the board. Your father would tell you the same." And there it was. The whole trap sprung open in the churchyard sun. Grace, across the yard, watched the two men talk with their heads together and could not hear a word, but she did not need to hear it. She knew a foreclosure with a wedding attached when she saw one being arranged. She saw Ezra Cole gesture toward because Nathaniel's face, and she thought, calm as still water. "So, here is where I learn what he is. Here and not before." Everything else was rehearsal. Nathaniel looked across the churchyard at his wife. She was standing alone, as she always stood alone, straight-backed and dry-eyed, with the whole county whispering behind their hands about her. And she was not looking at him with any plea in her face at all. She was merely looking at him, waiting. Not pleading to be believed, not feigning innocence, just standing there, allowing him to dictate her fate as she had let him dictate everything else, granting him the latitude to disappoint her, and asking for nothing. And Nathaniel Harper thought of a wound endured with dry eyes at an altar. He pictured a housemaid diligently learning her letters. He envisioned a woman astride a horse, constructing a path for him to exercise mercy, cloaking it in reason. He considered a sum of $100 in October, and a cornfield ablaze with reeds, thrashing as if pursued by the devil, all because someone had extended them grace. "No," he declared to Ezra Cole. "Nathaniel, no." He uttered it with the same conviction he had once directed at Victoria, and it startled him just as profoundly. This time, he harbored not a shred of doubt. "I'll tell you what I know of my wife, Ezra, since you inquire and I could not answer. I know she absorbed the most grievous wrong I ever inflicted upon anyone, standing tall and unyielding, never once demanding recompense, though heaven knows she had every right. I know she salvaged a family I intended to break, and allowed me to believe it was my own volition. I know she teaches my scullery maid to read, not for any reason beyond the girl's own desire. And I know that whatever she conceals, and she is undoubtedly concealing something, it is not a husband, for a woman harboring a husband regards you with fear, and Grace has never, in her entire life, looked at me with fear. She looks at me as if she's tallying sums." He drew a breath. "I will not cast her aside to wed a woman who has been circling my downfall like a carrion crow. I married Grace. It was a cold pact, made for the sake of appearances, and I shamed her in the process. Yet it is the sole good thing my father's debts ever compelled me to do, and I'll be damned before I barter it for the Collins fortune. Now, That is the end of it. Shaishata. Busum tusa. Ezra Cole stared at him as if he'd taken leave of his senses. You'll be ruined. Then I shall be ruined married to a woman worth 10 of Victoria Collins, Nathaniel stated. And I shall drown a richer man than she will ever make anyone. And with that, he turned and strode across the churchyard, past every whispering neighbor, directly to his wife. And in full view of the entire county, he offered her his arm. Grace's gaze fell upon his outstretched arm. Then it lifted to his face. "Do you know what they're saying about me?" she asked, her voice a mere whisper, audible only to him. "I know, and you know I have a secret. You said so yourself. You don't know it isn't the one they're claiming. I know it isn't the one they're claiming." "How?" Nathaniel inquired. "Because I've watched you for a month, Grace, and I have yet to see you afraid. And a woman with a husband in her past would be afraid. Whatever you are carrying, Grace, it is not fear. It never has been. So take my arm, and let us grant this county the disappointment of their lives, and walk out of here as people who have absolutely nothing to hide." For a fleeting moment, a single moment she would never acknowledge to anyone, least of all herself, Grace Harper's formidable defenses teetered on the brink of collapse. It was because a man had just publicly chosen her, in defiance of his own ruin, without possessing any knowledge of who or what she truly was. Nothing, save the accumulated evidence of a month spent observing her. No one had ever selected her over anything before. Certainly not a desperate man who had married her for protection. And here was that same man, offering her his arm before the very people he had once shamed her in front of, with his entire fortune balanced precariously on the other side of the scale, and he had chosen her. She took his arm. Her hand was steady. She had meticulously ensured that. "You are either the greatest fool in Pennsylvania," she remarked, "or you possess the makings of a good man after all. Why not both?" Nathaniel countered, tossing her own words back at her. She nearly laughed, and they walked out of that church, arm in arm, through a churchyard that had fallen into a deathly silence. And it was the most magnificent performance either of them had ever given, and neither was entirely performing, and that was the peril. That was the entire terrifying peril of it. Victoria Collins observed their departure from her carriage, and as she watched, she understood that the bigamy rumor had failed. Instead of driving Nathaniel away from the governess, it had propelled him toward her, publicly, before witnesses, which was something Victoria could ill afford. She ceased her machinations then. That was the pivotal moment. While others would later attempt to pinpoint the turning point to different days, Grace always knew the truth of it. It turned in that carriage when Victoria Collins watched a man she had intended to control escort his penniless wife through a silent churchyard, and decided that gentleness had run its course. She issued the summons. Grace learned of it 4 days later, and not from Wickham. She learned it from Nathaniel, who arrived home at midday, a most unusual occurrence for him, and stood in the front hall, a paper in his hand, his face the color of ash, and called her name in a voice she had never heard from him, not cold, not proud, but hollow, like a man calling into a well. "Grace." She emerged from the morning room. "What has happened?" "It's been called." He extended the paper. His hand trembled slightly. The big note, 11,000, secured against the mill, the bridge, the eastern bottomland, everything within reach, everything I have left. I always thought it was held by a Philadelphia bank. I've been paying the interest to a Philadelphia agent for a year." He looked up at her, and there was a terrible desperation in his eyes. The look of a man watching the last floor of his house crumble away. "It's not a bank." The agent finally named the holder, and now they intend to collect. "It's Collins. Governor Collins holds it, which means Victoria," Grace said quietly. "She's had it all along." Nathaniel's voice cracked. "Every visit, every threat, she has owned my ruin the entire time and let me believe. Oh God, Grace, she's been toying with me like a cat with something half dead. The whole marriage plot, the rumors, all of it. She's had the noose around my neck since spring, and I never once felt it. He pressed the heel of his hand to his eyes. 30 days. I have 30 days to find $11,000, or she takes the mill, the bridge, the bottomland. And with those gone, the rest will fall within a week. It's finished. Grace, it's finished. My father's land, 60 years of it, and I'll be the Harper who lost it to a woman I wouldn't marry. And Grace Harper stood in the front hall of the house that was hers, and yet not hers, bearing the news she had known for 2 weeks and could not reveal. She looked at the shattered pride of a man who had chosen her in a churchyard against precisely this fate, and in the space of 3 heartbeats she made the most significant decision of her life. Not yet. She could end it now. She could take him upstairs, open the iron trunk, lay the deeds across the bed, and declare that the land she was foreclosing on had never truly been his to pledge. It's mine. It's been mine all along. That note is tied to my fence post, and I can cut it down with a word. She could save him this very hour, watch the ash drain from his face and the light return. And she did not do it because it was not yet the appointed day. Because Wickham had not yet finished buying back the smaller debts. And if she revealed herself now, before all the pieces were in place, Victoria would have a month to retaliate, to challenge the trusts, to drag the old grants into court, where a governor's money could tie them up for years. Because the one advantage Grace possessed, the only one, was that no living soul knew what she was, and she would expend that advantage once, at the opportune moment, for the killing blow, and not one moment before. And because she was honest enough with herself to admit it, a cold, calculating corner of her wanted to witness what this man would do in the final 30 days of his ruin. She wanted to know whether the goodness in him was genuine or merely a fleeting bloom in fair weather. A man's true accounts are written in his worst month, her father used to say. She would read Nathaniel Harper's worst month before she decided how much of herself to give him. It was not a kind sentiment. She knew it was not kind, but she had learned the hard way that kindness offered prematurely is merely another name for being a fool, and she had been many things in her life, but never once a fool. 30 days, she said aloud, her voice as calm as still water. 30 days. He let out a terrible, hollow laugh. You needn't stay for it, Grace. That's the honest truth, and I'll say it plainly. This marriage was cover for precisely the ruin that has befallen us, and the cover has failed, and there's nothing holding you here but a document I've dishonored from the very first hour. If you wish to leave, go now, before the scandal breaks with whatever remains of your good name. I will not blame you. I will not pursue you. God knows I've given you no reason to stay and stand in the fire with me. Grace looked at him for a long moment. No, she said. Grace, I said no. I don't run, Mr. Harper. I thought you would have learned that by now. She took the foreclosure paper from his hand and folded it precisely into a small, hard square, the way she folded everything she intended to keep. You have 30 days, then we have 30 days. I don't yet know how it ends, and that is the truth. And I will not lie to you and promise you sunshine. But I will tell you what I know, which is more than you think I know, and it is this. She stepped closer to him, closer than she had stood since the altar, and she said it low and with certainty. Victoria Collins is not nearly as clever as she believes, because she has built her entire scheme on one idea, that you married a woman who owns nothing, can do nothing, and is nothing. She staked everything on that. Her noose, her rumors, her 30 days, all of it hinges on you having married a woman worth precisely nothing. Grace's eyes did not waver. She may be mistaken about that. She may be very mistaken, and a scheme built on a mistaken idea, Mr. Harper, no matter how clever, collapses all at once, like a dam breaking. Nathaniel stared at her. Something in what she had said, and more in how she had said it, sent a strange, still current through him, a sense formless and enormous that he had married something far larger than he understood, and that the ash-gray certainty of his ruin had, in the space of one folded paper, become a great deal less certain. Grace, he said slowly. What do you know? No, I know it's not over, she replied. And I know I'm not leaving. And I know you should eat something because a man cannot fight a foreclosure on an empty stomach, and whatever else happens in the next 30 days, you are going to fight." She turned toward the kitchen, then stopped, and uttered the last of it over her shoulder without looking at him, because she could only say it that way. "You chose me in that churchyard, Nathaniel, against your own ruin, based on nothing but a month of watching me. Nobody has ever chosen me over anything in my entire life." Her voice was perfectly even. It cost her everything to maintain that composure. "I will remember it. Whatever comes, I will remember that you did that." And she walked to the kitchen, leaving Nathaniel Harper alone in his front hall with nothing in his hands, his ruin seemingly sealed, and his wife a mystery deepening with every passing hour. And for the first time since the note had been called, he felt something other than despair. He did not have a name for it, but Grace could have supplied it. It was what her father had told her about long ago in a room filled with deeds. Land held quietly, held for the right reason, sets a person free. He had felt the first breath of it, though he did not know it. The first breath of a freedom that was coming for the entire ruined county, quiet as growing roots, emanating from the very person Victoria Collins had staked her entire scheme on being worth nothing at all. In the kitchen, Grace set water to boil and took out paper, beginning to write to Ezra Wickham the letter that would set the final pieces in motion. Her hand was steady. It was always steady. But she paused once in the middle of a line and pressed her fingers hard against her own breastbone, over the place where her fortress lay, holding them there for a moment until the thing behind it settled. Then she finished the letter, sealed it, put the kettle on, and went to tend to her husband. The letter to Wickham was dispatched at dawn, and by the third dawn, a reply had arrived, but it was not the one Grace had hoped for. "My dear Mrs. Harper, I write in haste and in worry. The smaller debts are proceeding. I have quietly bought back 4 of the tenant arrears and hold a promise on the mill mortgage, all under the guise of a Baltimore holding concern that traces to no one. Good. But here is the trouble. The great note, the £11,000 held by Collins. I have tried 3 times to arrange its purchase, and each time been turned away. The governor's people will not sell it at any price. They do not want the money. They want the land." Which tells me what you already fear. This was never about a debt. And there is worse. Someone has been to the county records office in Chambersburg asking after old grants, asking after the Vance name. I do not yet know who sent them, but someone is pulling the same thread you are from the other end. And if they reach the middle before you are ready, everything unravels. Move carefully. Move soon. E.V. Grace read it twice, then held it to the candle, watching the Vance name curl to ash. She sat for a long moment in the dim light, hands flat on the bed. Someone was inquiring about the Vance grants. There were only 2 people in the world who could have initiated that. One was dead. The other was Victoria Collins. And if Victoria had even caught a whiff of the Vance name, then Victoria was no longer merely calling in a note. She was hunting for the very thing that could destroy her. And she was hunting in the one place it could be found. Grace did not panic. She had never once in her life been able to afford panic. But she understood that the 30 days had just transformed into something faster and far more dangerous than a foreclosure. It had become a race between 2 women digging toward the same buried prize from opposite ends, and whoever reached the deeds first and could prove them first would claim the county and everyone in it. She dressed, she went downstairs. And she found the household already in an uproar because the second blow of that terrible week had landed in the night, and it had nothing to do with notes or grants at all. The creek had risen. "Flooded, ma'am?" "Mrs." Doyle said, meeting her at the foot of the stairs, sleeves already rolled up. "In the night, there's been rain in the hills for 3 days. We never saw a drop down here, and it all came down at once. The low bridge is gone. The Miller Road's under water. Sally's uncle rode up an hour ago. He says the Reed place is completely cut off, and the 2 holdings pass the creek, and there are families on roofs, ma'am. On their roofs in July." Her weathered face was grim. The master's already gone, took every man on the place and rowed for the water, but there aren't enough of them, and the water's still climbing. Grace was already moving before the old woman finished. How many families cut off? 6 that we know of. Could be more past the ridge. And the master's men, how many? 9. 9 men for 6 families and rising water. It's not enough. Grace was already tying up her skirts, already calling for her boots. Mrs. Doyle, I need every wagon on this place, every rope, every empty grain sack, and I need them at the creek within the hour. I need the cook boiling everything she can boil, because those people on the roofs have been wet and cold all night, and they'll go down with fever before they go down with drowning. And I need you to send Sally's uncle around to every farm the water hasn't reached, and tell them the mistress of Harper is asking, not the master. The mistress is asking every able man to come to the creek and pull their neighbors off the water. Tell them I'll feed every man who comes, and his family besides, for a month. Go. Mrs. Doyle stared at her for half a second. Then she went. There is a way a person gives an order that makes the giving of it unquestionable, and Grace had it, and had always had it, and had spent 3 years hiding it in cold schoolrooms. Grace reached the creek within the hour, standing up in the lead wagon with her skirts tied and her hair coming down. The sight that met her would have stopped a softer woman cold. But Grace had not come to look at the water. She had come to read it, the way she read a ledger, for the place where the sums stopped making sense. Nathaniel was in it up to his chest, roped to a tree, hauling a child off the ridge of a half-drowned roof, and he was doing it with a raw animal courage that made her chest ache to watch, and he was doing it wrong. Not the courage. The courage was faultless. But 9 men flinging themselves at 6 flooded farms in whatever order they reached them was 9 men exhausting themselves, saving the nearest first and letting the farthest drown. She found the man in charge, which was no man, which was the whole problem. She climbed down. She caught Nathaniel Stewart by the arm as he ran past with a rope. Who's furthest out? Ma'am, I've no time. Who is furthest out? Which family? Answer me. The Websters, past the second bend, but we can't reach them till you reach them first. Grace's voice cut through the roar of the water like a blade. You always reach the furthest first, because the near ones can hold longest, and the far ones drown while you're saving people who'd have kept. Send 4 men and 2 ropes to the Websters now, this minute, and leave 2 men here for the Reeds, because the Reeds have a barn roof and a fighting chance, and they'll hold. You're saving them in the order they're easy instead of the order they're dying. Stop it. The Stewarts gaped at her. Nathaniel, 20 feet out and chest deep, heard her. He turned his head through the spray, and he saw his wife standing on the bank, giving his men the order he should have given an hour ago. And he did not bristle, and he did not shout that the land was Harper business and no place for a governess. He shouted, "Do what she says." And they did. For the next 6 hours, Grace Harper ran a flood the way her father had taught her to run a set of books, coldly, completely saving the columns that would fall first and holding the ones that would keep. She set the wagons in a line to move the rescued families to high ground. She had the cook's cauldrons brought to the creek and made every soaked, shivering child drink something hot the moment they touched dry land because she knew the way. She knew arithmetic, that the flood would kill more by fever in the following week than by water in the following hour, and the men came from farms the master had never shown kindness to. They came because the mistress of Harper had asked them and promised to feed their families, and because word had already gone round all summer, quiet as roots, that the new Mrs. Harper had saved the Reeds and taught the scullery maid her letters and was whatever the church whispered a woman worth riding out for. By dusk, every family was off the water. Not one soul was lost. And Nathaniel Harper stood on the bank, soaked to the bone and shaking with exhaustion, and watched his penniless governess wife directing wagons in the last gray light, like a general who'd won a field. And something in his chest that had been coming loose for a month came loose entirely. He waded out of the water and walked straight to her, and he did not care who saw it. "You saved them," he said. "Everyone. I was drowning them by inches, saving them wrong, and you walked up. And Grace, where did you learn to do that?" To think like that with the water coming and children screaming and everyone half mad? How do you stay so cold in the middle of it? I'm not cold, Grace said, and for once it came out with the truth showing through the still water, because she was too tired to hold the fortress perfectly, and some of what was behind it leaked out at the edges. I'm never cold, Nathaniel. I only look it. Underneath, I'm as frightened as anyone. I just learned young that a frightened person who acts frightened is no use to anyone. And a frightened person who acts calm can save 6 families off a flood. The calm's a choice. It's the hardest choice I make every single day, and I've been making it so long it looks like coldness to people who've never had to. She swayed on her feet then, the strength going out of her all at once. Now the work was done. I'm not cold. I'm just tired. I'm so tired. And Nathaniel Harper caught his wife before she fell and held her up on the bank of a flood in front of half the county. And it was the first time he had ever touched her, and neither of them said a single word about it, and neither of them ever forgot it. That should have been the turn. In a kinder story, it would have been the turn. The flood survived, the marriage forged in it, and the county saved. But Grace knew the shape of real trouble, and real trouble does not come once and go. It comes, and then it comes again, while you're still bleeding from the first time. And that was exactly what Victoria Collins was counting on, because Victoria did not come to the flood. Victoria stayed dry, and while half the county was hauling children off roofs, she was in the parlor of every dry house that mattered, and she was telling a story. Grace learned it 2 days later, when the water had gone down and the fever had come up, exactly as she'd feared, in a dozen soaked households at once. She was at the Reed place herself, having ridden out with the cook's remedies and clean linen and every scrap of quinine she'd been able to buy quietly in Chambersburg, when Mrs. Reed took her aside with a face gone hard as flint. "You'll want to hear the newest," Mrs. Reed said, "and you'll not like it. Tell me anyway." "She's turned the flood against you, Mrs." Reed's mouth was a thin line. "The Collins woman. She's going around to all the dry folk, the ones the water never touched, the ones with money and no cause to love a poor family. And she's telling them the mistress of Harper made a great show at the creek to buy herself a name. That you fed men and made promises you can't keep because you've no money to keep them. That you're spending Nathaniel Harper's last dollars playing the lady of the manor while he drowns in debt. And that when the money's gone and it's near gone, she says, everyone knows the note's called. All those families you promised to feed for a month will starve worse than before because you've raised their hopes only to run off when the crash comes." Mrs. Reed's eyes burned. "She's making your kindness into a con, Mrs. Harper. She's telling the county you saved us to use us, and the worst of it, the truly wicked part, is that she's using the note against you. She's saying, look, the great note's called. The Harpers are finished, so how can the mistress feed anyone for a month? And she's right that the note's called, which makes the lie sound like arithmetic. Only by..." And there it was again, Victoria's one true genius, the only real weapon she'd ever had. She took a true fact, the called note, the real ruin, and she wrapped a lie around it so tight that pulling off the lie meant pulling off the truth, and no one could tell where one ended and the other began. Grace stood very still in the Reed farmyard. "She's clever," Grace said at last, quietly. "I'll give her that, to her grave. She's the cleverest cruel woman I've ever come across, and I've come across a few." She looked at Mrs. Reed. "But she's made one mistake, and she's made it because she can't help it, because it's the same mistake she's made from the start. She thinks I have no money. She's built this whole thing, the note, the rumors, the con she's painting me as. Every stone of it rests on me being penniless. And so she's told the county I can't feed you for a month." Grace's voice was soft and level, and there was something in it that made Mrs. Reed go quiet. "So I'm going to feed you for a month. All of you. Every family on that flood, exactly as I promised, out of a purse Victoria Collins swears doesn't exist. And when the food keeps coming week after week, after the money's supposed to have run out, when the crash she's promised never comes, every lie she's told falls at once, because they're all tied to the one lie underneath. And the one lie underneath is that I'm nothing." She almost smiled. Let her keep telling it. Every day she tells the county I have no money is a day she digs her own hole deeper, because I'm about to prove her a liar with bread. Whom? But even as she said it, Grace felt the cold edge of the real danger. And it was not the con, and it was not the rumors. It was the line in Wickham's letter. Someone has been asking after the Vance name. Because feeding the county for a month out of a purse that supposedly didn't exist would answer Victoria's lie, but it would also unavoidably raise the very question Victoria most needed answered. Where does the governess get her money? Every loaf of bread Grace put on a flooded family's table was proof she had a hidden fortune. And a hidden fortune was exactly the thread that led back through the trusts to Eleanor Vance, to the deeds, to everything. She was going to have to spend her secret to save these people. Not reveal it, not yet, but spend it visibly in a way that would set every clever person in the county wondering where it came from. She was going to have to make herself more mysterious in the exact month that Victoria had someone in the records office pulling on the only thread that could unravel her. It was a terrible choice, and Grace made it, standing in a farmyard without a flicker crossing her face, because the alternative was letting a dozen families starve to keep her own secret safe. And Grace Bennett had eaten enough cold suppers in enough cold rooms to know exactly what starving was, and she would spend every deed in the iron trunk before she'd watch the Reed children go hungry to protect a fortune. "Feed them," she said to Mrs. Reed. "Start today. Tell no one where the food comes from. If they ask, say it's the mistress's kindness, and leave it there." She swung back up onto her horse. "I've a letter to write." She wrote to Wickham that night, and it was the hardest letter she'd yet sent because it accepted a risk she'd spent 3 years avoiding. "Buy grain," she wrote. "All you can, quietly, through the Baltimore Concern, and have it carted to me as relief supply. I know what it exposes. I know every sack of it is a question about where my money comes from. Send it anyway. There are children on those farms, and I'll not trade their bellies for my safety. But move faster on the note and the grants, because I am about to make myself the most interesting mystery in the county, and I need to be finished being a mystery before the wrong person solves me." She sealed it. And then she did a thing she had not done since her father died. She sat on the floor of the east room with the iron trunk open and the deeds in her lap, and she was afraid, plainly. Honestly afraid in the one room in the world where she let herself be, because for the first time the game had a clock on it that she did not control, and a woman digging toward her from the other side, and a dozen lives now hanging on choices that would light a lantern over the very secret that kept her alive. Nathaniel found the light under her door and knocked. She had the deeds hidden before the second knock. Iron trunk shut with the smooth, card-sharp motion that had never once failed her. "Come." He came in, still moving stiff from the flood, bruised down one arm, and he stood just inside the door the way he always stood, a man at the edge of cold water. "You've been out at the farm since first light 3 days running. Someone has to be. I know. That's what I came to say." He worked his jaw the way he did before the hard, true things. "The men are talking. Not the way Victoria wants them to. They're saying the mistress of Harper worked the flood harder than the master fed the county out of her own hand, sat up with fevered children till dawn, while the governor's daughter stayed dry in her parlor telling lies about it. Victoria has spent a week trying to make you a villain, Grace, and every day you make her look worse just by getting up in the morning and doing the next kind thing." He shook his head slowly. "I don't understand it. I don't understand you. A man who'd been treated the way I've treated you, shamed at the altar, forbidden the land, left to twist that man would let my county drown despite me, and no one would blame him. You do the opposite. You save everything I own while I'm too proud to ask you to, and you do it for people who whisper about you in church. Why?" Grace looked at him a long moment, and she came in that moment closer than she had ever come to telling him everything. The deeds were 3 feet away under a locked lid. The whole truth was 1 sentence long. She could have said it. Some tired, aching, no longer quite armored part of her wanted badly to say it, to let this one man see the whole of what she was, to stop being a mystery to the person who, against every prediction she'd have made, was beginning to matter. She didn't. but she gave him the truest thing she could give him without the deeds. Because I know what it is to be worth nothing to the world and everything to no one, she said quietly. I was an orphan taken in by an old lawyer who owed my dead mother a kindness. I grew up watching families with money throw away children who had none, watching whole counties decide a person's worth by their coat. I swore when I was a girl, no older than Sally, that if I ever had the power to stand between cruelty and someone helpless, I'd stand there. And I'd not count the cost, and I'd not care whether they whispered about me in church while I did it. She met his eyes. You ask why I saved your county, though you shamed me. It's not for you, Nathaniel. I'll be honest with you because you've earned honesty. In the beginning, it was not for you at all. It was for the Reeds and the Websters and Sally and every helpless soul this ruin would have crushed. You just happened to own the ground they stood on. In the beginning, Nathaniel repeated. He'd caught it the way he caught everything now. You said in the beginning. And now? He asked quietly. A man at the edge of cold water deciding whether to step in. Is it still not for me at all, Grace? And Grace Harper, who had a fortress round her heart, 3 years in the building, who was playing for half a county against a woman who'd already found the first thread of her secret, who could not possibly afford to answer that question honestly. Eat something and go to bed, Nathaniel, she said. You worked a flood with a hurt arm, and you're no good to anyone dead on your feet. He looked at her. And he understood that she hadn't answered, and he understood that not answering was itself an answer. And something eased in his bruised, exhausted face that hadn't eased in a month. That's not a no, he said. Go to bed. You didn't say no, Grace, and there was, God help them both, the beginning of a smile in it. I said go to bed, and I'll say it a third time, and then I'll have Mrs. Doyle drag you there by the ear. You're not too grand to be dragged. Go. He went. But he went slowly, and he looked back once from the door, and Grace sat very still until she heard his own door close down the hall. And then she let out a breath she felt like she'd been holding for a month, and she put her face in her hands. Just for a moment, just one. Because the fortress was not falling exactly, but it had learned to ache, and she had not felt it ache since she was a girl. She had 24 days left on Victoria's clock. She had a county to feed with a secret purse that would set every mind in the district wondering. She had a woman digging toward the Vance name from the records office in Chambersburg, and she did not know how close that woman had gotten. And she had, worst of all, the things she could least afford. She was beginning to want the man to live, not just his county, beginning to want him for himself, and not just as the ground her helpless people stood on. Her father's voice came to her in the dark. Money bought and sold makes a person cruel, but land held quiet, held for the right reason, makes a person free. I found the right reason, Papa, she whispered to the empty room. That's the trouble. I've gone and found more than one. She did not sleep that night. She sat up with the fever remedies and the account books and Wickham's letters, and near midnight she made a decision that would either save everything or lose it. And she made it alone in the cold, the way she'd made every real decision of her life. She would show a piece of the secret, not the deeds, not yet, but she would let Nathaniel see, in the next few days, one true edge of what she was. Enough that when the crash came and Victoria reached for the rope, he would already half know, already be braced, already be on the right side of the thing when it broke, because she could feel it coming. Now the true climax of it, the day the digging women met in the middle. And when it came, Grace did not intend for her husband to be standing on the wrong ground when it did. The next morning, before light, a wagon came up the Harper Drive, loaded with grain, more grain than a ruined man could ever have bought, and it came in the name of a Baltimore concern no one had heard of. And the driver asked for the mistress, not the master. Nathaniel watched from the window as his penniless wife signed for a fortune in relief supply with a steady hand and directed it to the flooded farms, and turned away a fortune's worth of food as though it were nothing at all, as though a governess with no money and no people had a Baltimore grain concern at her command. He did not say anything, but Grace, glancing up, met his eyes through the window glass, and she saw that he had seen, and she saw the question rising in his face, plain as sunrise. Where does a penniless governess get a wagon of grain? And she did not look away from it this time. She let him ask it with his eyes. She let him wonder. It was the first edge of the secret shown on purpose, and she watched him take it in, and she thought, "Good. Wonder, Nathaniel. Get used to wondering. Because the answer's coming, and when it comes, it's going to save your life, and I need you ready to believe a thing no man in this county would believe about the woman he married for cover." She went out to meet the wagon, and the game, which had been a slow thing all summer, quiet as roots, began at last to move fast, and everyone who was in it could feel it now. The Reeds and Mrs. Doyle and Nathaniel. And 12 miles off, in a dry parlor with a records clerk's report in her hand, Victoria Collins, who had just that morning received a piece of paper with a name on it she did not yet understand. The name was Vance. The name meant nothing to Victoria Collins for exactly 2 days. Then it meant everything, and it came to her the way the worst things always came to her, through a clerk who wanted paying. "Vance," the records man said, standing in her father's parlor with his hat in his hands and greed in his eyes. "You had me pull every old grant with a hidden trust behind it, ma'am, and I pulled them, and near half of them come back to the one name. Eleanor Vance. A widow. Dead 30 years. Grants from before the war, tied up in a dozen holding names so clever I near missed it. The mill sits on Vance ground. The bridge. The eastern bottomland. All of it, ma'am. The very ground your notes secured against." He turned his hat. "But here's the part worth extra. The trust don't end with the dead widow. It passes, daughter to daughter, and the last name in the chain, the living heir to the whole of it." He paused because he was a man who knew the price of a pause. "I had to go to the church rolls to find her Christian name under the trust name. It cost me some trouble. Say it. Is greater than Victoria said. Is greater than Grace," the clerk said. "Grace Vance. Only she doesn't go by Vance. Went by her foster father's name her whole life, Bennett." He watched Victoria's face. "The heir to half this county, ma'am, the living owner of the very ground you mean to foreclose on, is the governess, is Mrs. Nathaniel Harper." For a long moment Victoria Collins did not move at all, and then she laughed a short, disbelieving, furious sound. Because the whole shape of the summer turned over in front of her at once, and she saw with sickening clarity everything she had missed. The steadiness at the altar. The purse that shouldn't exist. The wagon of grain from Baltimore. The way a penniless governess had fed a flooded county and never once looked afraid of running out. She had built her entire scheme on one stone, that Nathaniel Harper had married a woman worth nothing. And the stone had been rotten from the first day, and she had stacked $11,000 and a whole summer's cruelty on top of it. "She owns it," Victoria said slowly. "She owns the ground my note is secured against, which means my note is secured against land your borrower never rightly owned to pledge," the clerk said. "Because he'd worked it out on the ride over, and meant to be paid for that too. If she brings them deeds to a court, ma'am, your $11,000 is secured against nothing. You'd be foreclosing on a woman who owns the farm from under you. The note wouldn't be worth the paper. She could let you call it, walk into any courthouse in the state and take the whole board." He spread his hands. Unless what? Unless you move first. She doesn't know you know. Far as that governess is aware, her secret's still buried, and she's playing a slow game to spring it when she's good and ready. But a deed's only worth what a court will honor, ma'am, and a court honors the record." And the record, he smiled, and it was an ugly smile. The record's in a little office in Chambersburg in a book that a man could get to before she does. Trust that old from before the war with the original grants gone missing. If the recorded copy were to go missing too, there'd be nothing left but her word, and a stack of papers any lawyer worth his fee could tie up in the courts for 10 years. And in 10 years, ma'am, you'd have foreclosed and sold and settled the whole county 3 times over. Victoria Collins looked at the greedy little man in her father's parlor, and she understood that he had just handed her the way to win. Not honestly, there had never been anything honest in it, but completely. "Get me the record," she said. "The book, the recorded trust. I don't care what it costs." Get it out of that office and into my hands, and I'll see you never work another day in your life in the good sense of it. She was already moving to the writing desk, and I want it done inside the week before she brings her deeds to anyone. She thinks she has time. She thinks the note gives her 30 days to play her hand. Victoria's mouth curved. She doesn't know the ground's about to move under her feet. The clerk left Rich, and Victoria Collins sat down and wrote 3 letters of her own. And the race that Grace had known was coming stopped being a slow thing entirely. Grace felt it before she knew it. That was the thing about Grace, the thing her father had made in her and cold rooms had honed. She could feel a set of books going wrong before she found the figure. And on the 9th day of Victoria's 30, she woke at dawn with a cold certainty in her chest that the game had turned. And she came downstairs to find Wickham's man already at the door, having ridden through the night his horse near foundered. Mrs. Harper? He was gray with exhaustion and fear. Mr. Wickham says come, says drop everything and come to Chambersburg today, this morning, and bring your deeds. And don't let them out of your hand for a second on the road. Somebody got into the county records office 2 nights past, broke the lock. And ma'am, he swallowed, the book's gone. The trust book. The one with the Vance record in it. Torn clean out and carried off. Mr. Wickham says whoever did it knows what you are, and means to make your deeds worthless by killing the record behind them. And he says if you don't move today, it may already be too late. Grace went very still in the doorway. How much does she know? She said. It wasn't really a question. Victoria, if she took the record, she knows the name. She knows it's me. She's known for Grace, did the arithmetic cold and fast. 2 days. Maybe 3. She's known for 3 days, and I've been feeding flood victims and wondering about wagons of grain while she tore the ground out from under me. Mr. Wickham says, I heard what Mr. Wickham says. Grace was already turning, already calling up the stairs for Mrs. Doyle, already moving with the terrible, clean speed of a woman who has run out of time to be careful. Tell him I'm coming. Tell him I'm coming within the hour, and I'm bringing everything. And then Nathaniel was on the stairs, half-dressed, woken by the commotion, and he heard the last of it, and he came down fast. What's happened, Grace? What's happened? Tell me. And Grace Harper stood in the front hall of the house that was hers and not hers, with a ruined messenger at the door, and her whole hidden fortress about to be stormed from an angle she hadn't defended. And she made the last decision, the one she'd been circling all summer, the one she'd sworn to make only on the right day, at the right hour, by her own choosing. Victoria had taken the choosing from her. There was no more time to spend the secret slowly, to show it edge by edge, to let him get used to wondering. The wondering was over. It was going to be all at once now in a front hall at dawn, or it was going to be too late. Come upstairs, Grace said to her husband. There's a thing I have to show you, and there's no gentle way left to do it, so I'll do it fast. Come up. And Nathaniel, she stopped one hand on the banister and looked back at him, and for once she let the whole of it show in her face, the fear and the fortune and the 3 years of waiting, and the thing she wanted and couldn't afford. Whatever you feel when you've seen it, feel it quick because we've maybe got a day before it's all gone, and I need you on the right ground when it breaks. He followed her up. She unlocked the east room. She knelt at the iron trunk, and she turned the key, and she lifted the lid, and for the first time in 3 years, she opened it in front of another living soul. She lifted out the deeds, and laid them on the bed one after another. And she said it plainly, the way her father had taught her to read scripture aloud and slow until the meaning came clear. My mother's name was Vance. Eleanor Vance was my grandmother. Before the war, she was granted land, a great deal of land, half this county near enough, and when she died, it passed in trust hidden in a dozen names. So, no man could steal it from a line of women while they were too small to hold it. It came down to my mother, and from my mother to me. My foster father kept it whole and hidden my whole life, and made me swear on his deathbed to tell no one until I found a reason worth the telling. She looked up at Nathaniel, whose face had gone white and still. The mill your father mortgaged sits on my ground. The bridge is on my ground. The eastern bottomland. Every acre of the land Victoria Collins's note is secured against is mine, Nathaniel. It's been mine the whole time. It was mine when you shamed me at the altar and forbade me to touch the land. Half of what you called yours all summer has never in law been yours at all. It's hers no more than it's yours. It's mine. The silence in the East Room was the deepest silence of the whole summer. Nathaniel Harper looked at the deeds. He looked at his wife. He looked at the deeds again. And Grace watched him. And she did not know, for the first time in a long time, she genuinely did not know which way a man broke when the ground moved under him this hard. Some men learning their penniless wife owned the county would feel it as the deepest wound to their pride a proud man could take. Some men would rage. Some would be shamed past forgiving. She had married a proud man, the proudest in the county, a man who'd shamed her at an altar sooner than let anyone think him weak, and she had just told him that everything he owned, everything he'd forbidden her to touch, everything he'd nearly drowned in the flood to save was hers. She braced for the rage. She had a whole calm answer ready for the rage. Nathaniel did not rage. He sat down slowly on the edge of the bed among the deeds, and he put his face in his hands, and when he spoke, his voice came out shaking and low, and it was not anger in it at all. It was something that broke her heart clean across. "You could have saved yourself the whole summer," he said. "That's what I keep. That's the thing I can't, Grace. The day I shamed you at the altar, you already owned it. You already owned all of it. You could have stood up in that church and said one word, and I'd have been the fool and the pauper, and you'd have been the richest woman in the county, and you'd have been in the right, and every soul there would have taken your part." He lowered his hands and looked at her, and his eyes were wet, and a proud man does not let his eyes be wet in front of anyone, and he let her see it. "And instead, you stood there. You took it. You let me forbid you to touch your own land. You let me call you nothing in front of 200 people while you owned the ground the church was built on. You let me be cruel to you for a month while you fed my county out of your own hand and asked nothing and told me nothing, and let me keep my pride." His voice cracked. "Why, in God's name, Grace? Why would you let me do that to you when one word would have ended it? Because a word said in anger buys you nothing but the pleasure of an hour," Grace said quietly. "My father taught me that. He said money bought and sold makes a person cruel, but land held quiet, held for the right reason, makes a person free. If I'd stood up at that altar and shamed you back, I'd have won the church and lost everything after it. I'd have made an enemy of a proud man instead of—" She stopped. "Instead of what?" "Instead of learning what kind of man he was underneath the pride," Grace said. "I had to know Nathaniel before I spent the thing my father died protecting. I had to know if the man I'd spend it on was worth it. So I waited. I watched you turn from the Reed's door instead of turning them out. I watched you choose me in a churchyard against your own ruin, not knowing I owned it, choosing me when choosing me looked like choosing beggary. I watched you shout, 'Do what she says,' in the middle of a flood instead of drowning your county to save your pride." Her voice was very steady, and behind the steadiness was 3 years of cold rooms and 1 long summer of waiting. "You passed, Nathaniel. Every test I never told you I was setting. You chose the right thing every time it cost you, and you chose it before you knew there was a fortune in it. That's the only kind of good that's worth anything, the kind a man does when he thinks it's going to cost him everything." She looked at him. "So, no. I don't regret the summer. I'd do it all again. I'd take the altar again to know what I know now." Nathaniel Harper looked at his wife across a bed strewn with deeds to half a county, and whatever was left of the proud, cold, a frightened man who'd turned his back at an altar finished breaking quietly, and something else stood up in its place. "I don't deserve you," he said. "That's plain arithmetic, and you're the one who taught me to read it. There's no ledger in the world balances what you've given against what I gave back." "Then stop trying to balance it," Grace said, "and help me save it because Victoria Collins knows and she's torn the record out of the county book. And if we don't move today, she'll tie my deeds up in a court for 10 years and foreclose on all of it before any judge ever rules. We haven't got time for you to feel unworthy." Nathaniel. I need you to get dressed and get the fastest horses on the place and ride with me to Chambersburg, because we've got maybe a day, and there's still one way to beat her, and I can't do it alone." That got him up. The despair went out of him, and something better came in, because a man who has just learned his wife is the strongest thing in his life does not want to sit and marvel at it. He wants to stand next to it and fight. "Tell me the way," he said, already pulling on his coat. "Tell me on the road, but tell me one thing first, Grace, before we ride, because I'll ride better knowing it." He stopped at the door and looked back at her. "This morning you said upstairs, you said feel it quick, whatever you feel, and be on the right ground when it breaks. So, I'll tell you what I feel, and you can do with it what you like. I feel like the biggest fool that ever drew breath for looking at you every day for a month and seeing a governess, and I feel he struggled with it. A proud man reaching for a word he'd never once used and meant I feel like a man who'd rather go under holding your hand than float on anyone else's fortune. That's what I feel. There. It said. Now, let's ride." And Grace Harper, who had a fortress 3 years in the building, felt the gate of it come open. At last, not fall, not break, but open from the inside by her own hand, and she did not have time to be afraid of it, because there was a county to save and a day to do it in. "Then ride," she said. "And Nathaniel," she caught his sleeve one moment. "Thank you for not raging." I braced for raging. Every proud man I ever knew would have raged. "I'm done being proud," Nathaniel said. "It's cost me everything worth having, and near cost me you. Come on." They rode for Chambersburg with the deeds in a satchel strapped across Grace's body, and they did not spare the horses, and on the road she told him the way, and it was thin, and it was desperate, and it was the only one there was. "The record's gone from the county book," she said, riding hard beside him. "That's Victoria's whole play, kill the record, and my deeds become one woman's word against a governor's money, and she ties it up in court till doomsday." But a record isn't the only proof of a trust, this old Nathaniel. There's the man who made it. Ezra Wickham drew half these trusts himself 40 years ago, working under my grandmother's own lawyer. He has the original drafts, his own copies in his own hand, witnessed and dated, older than the county record, and independent of it. If we can get my deeds and Wickham's originals in front of a judge together today before Victoria's people can move, we don't need the county book at all. 2 independent records, one of them from the drafting attorney himself, older than anything she's destroyed. Grace's jaw was set. But it has to be today. The moment she realizes the record alone won't hold, she'll go for Wickham, and Wickham's an old man living alone, and I'll not have his death on my hands for my land. We ride for Wickham first. We get him and his papers to the county judge before Victoria knows the record wasn't enough. And if we're too late, then we fight it in the courts for 10 years and Victoria forecloses in the meantime, and the Reeds and the Websters and every family off that flood loses everything, and it'll have been my pride that did it. My waiting, my slow, careful game that let her get ahead of me. Grace's voice was hard with something that was almost grief. "So we're not going to be too late." Ride. They reached Wickham's house by noon, and the old lawyer was alive and well and terrified because he'd already had a visitor that morning. A man offering to buy his old papers at a price no honest offer ever reached, and he'd turned the man away and then sat with a loaded pistol on his desk ever since, an old man who knew exactly what the offer meant. They came for the draft. Wickham said, gripping Grace's hands, his own shaking, "This very morning, which means she's worked it out that the county record alone won't hold against the original trust, and she means to buy or steal or burn every independent copy before you can bring them to law. Child, we've hours, not days, hours." He was already gathering papers, decades of them, into a battered case. "But she's made one error, and it's the same error she's made all along. And it's the error of people who've never had to be clever because they've always had money." He snapped the case shut. "She thinks the only copies are mine. She doesn't know your grandmother's own lawyer lodged a third set with the state in Harrisburg 40 years back under seal precisely so that no local mischief could ever unmake this trust. I've the receipt for the lodgment. It's beyond her reach entirely." The state has held the proof of what you own since before Victoria Collins was born. He looked up fierce and old and glad. She's been racing you for a record she could destroy. She never knew there was one she couldn't touch. Ye can dig it, eh? And there it was, the twist under the twist. The thing Grace's own foster father had built into the trust 40 years before any of them were born. A failsafe laid down by an old lawyer who'd known even then that money would someday come hunting a line of women who held land. The proof had been safe in Harrisburg the whole time. Victoria had spent her cruelty and her cleverness racing to destroy a copy that was never the only copy, could never have been the only copy, because a careful man had made certain of it 2 generations back. Grace sat down hard, and for one moment, the tears she never let herself cry came very close, because she felt her father's hand, and his father's hand reaching down 40 years to hold her up in the 1 hour she'd needed. Holding. He knew, she whispered. Papa's own mentor. He knew someday it had come to this. He protected me before I was born. He protected the line, Wickham said gently. Women who hold land have always needed protecting from men who hold money. He was one of the few lawyers in this state who ever thought it worth the doing. Now, he hefted the case. We don't even need to beat her to the judge today, child. We need only to get on the record that a sealed state lodgment exists. The moment the court knows Harrisburg holds independent proof, Victoria's whole play collapses. She can't destroy what the state has under seal. She can't tie up in 10 years of litigation a trust the Commonwealth itself has vouched for. It's over. Do you understand me? The moment we speak the word Harrisburg in front of that judge, it's over. And she's lost. And you've won. And there's not one thing her father's money can do about it. Grace stood up. And Nathaniel, who had listened to all of it without a word, watched his wife stand up in a country lawyer's parlor with 40 years of protection at her back and the whole game won in her hands. And he did a thing then that he had never done in his life. He crossed the room and he took her hand in front of Wickham, in front of God, and he lifted it and he pressed it to his mouth. Not the way a man kisses a lady's hand in a parlor, courtly and cold, but the way a man kisses the hand of the person who has just saved his life and everyone he's responsible for, hard and long with his eyes shut. I shamed you at an altar, he said low, his mouth still against her hand. I forbade you your own land. I called you nothing in front of the county, and you saved every soul I'm bound to protect, and you did it while I was too proud to see you. And now you've won it all back, with a word your grandfather's lawyer laid down 40 years ago to keep women like you safe from men like me. He raised his head and looked at her, and there was nothing left in his face of the proud man at the altar. Nothing at all. I don't want a contract anymore, Grace. I never should have. I want a marriage, a true one. Not because you own the county before God, not because of that. You can put the whole of it in the Reed's name tomorrow, and I'll love you the same in a rented room. I want it because you're the finest thing I've ever stood next to, and I've spent a summer being too much a fool to say so, and I'll not be a fool 1 hour longer. And Grace Harper, with the deeds across her body and the whole war won, and her husband's kiss still warm on her hand, looked at the man she had tested through a whole cruel summer and found every time worth the testing. And she let the fortress stand open, all the way open for the first time since she was a girl. Ask me on the courthouse steps, she said, and her voice was not quite steady, and she did not try to make it steady, and that was the great victory of the summer, greater than the land. Ask me again when it's won and safe and Victoria's beaten and the county's saved and there's nothing left to test. Ask me then, Nathaniel, on the steps in the open in front of everyone who watched you shame me, and I'll give you an answer you'll not have to wait 3 years to be sure of. I'll ask you on the steps, Nathaniel said. Then let's go win it, Grace said. So you can. And they went out to the horses, the old lawyer and the ruined landowner and the governess who owned half the county with 40 years of protection in a battered case and the word that would end it all. Harrisburg ready on their lips, and they rode for the courthouse through the long gold light of a summer afternoon, toward the judge, toward the end of it, toward a governor's daughter who did not yet know that the ground she'd staked her whole cruel scheme on had never once in 40 years been ground she could stand on. They reached the courthouse an hour before it closed, and Victoria Collins was already on the steps. She had come to file her foreclosure. That was the thing Grace understood the moment she saw the plum silk at the top of the stairs. Victoria had not waited out the 30 days. Learning what Grace was had made her reckless, and reckless had made her fast, and she'd come to slam the foreclosure through, while the county record sat torn out and burning in her own grate, betting that a destroyed record and a governor's money would carry the day before any deed of Grace's could be honored. She had her father's lawyer with her, a sleek Philadelphia man, and a satchel of papers, and the smile of a woman one signature away from owning half a county. The smile faltered when she saw who came up the steps behind Grace. Nathaniel. She recovered fast the way her kind always did. And the governess, how fortunate. You've saved me sending word. I'm afraid I've come on unhappy business. The notes call the deadline a formality now, and I've documents here that settle the whole matter. The mill, the bridge, the bottomland. She let it land. It's finished, Nathaniel. I did try to spare you this. You'll remember I offered you another road and you chose. Her eyes flicked to Grace, cold as a closing door. Her. I remember, Nathaniel said. It's the best choice I ever made. Victoria's lawyer stepped forward smoothly. Mr. Harper's sentiment won't answer a lawful debt. The note is secured against the properties named. Unless you've $11,000 in that satchel, this court will. The note's secured against nothing, Grace said. She said it quietly from the step below Victoria, and she did not raise her voice. And that was what made every head on the courthouse steps turn, because a woman who shouts is a woman who hopes, and a woman who says a ruinous thing softly is a woman who knows. I'm sorry, the Philadelphia lawyer said. The note is secured against the mill, the bridge, and the eastern bottomland. Grace climbed one step. But a man can only pledge what he owns. And Nathaniel Harper's father never owned that ground to pledge. Neither did his father. It was granted before the war to a widow named Eleanor Vance, and held in trust. And it has passed from daughter to daughter, unbroken for 3 generations. Then another step. It passed to me. I am Grace Vance. The mill sits on my land. The bridge crosses my land. Every acre your note is secured against belongs to me, and has belonged to me since the day I was born. And no Harper ever had the right to pledge 1 foot of it to anyone. She was level with Victoria now, eye to eye on the top step. You've spent a summer preparing to foreclose on land the borrower never owned. Your note isn't worth the wax you sealed it with. For one instant, one single instant, Grace saw the fear go through Victoria Collins, raw and total, before the arrogance slammed back down over it. Lies, Victoria said. Where is your proof? A stack of papers any lawyer can forge, a trust that conveniently can't be found in the county record. And there it was, the tell. The thing that damned her. She said it before Grace had named the record, before anyone had mentioned that it was missing. The county has no record of any such trust. I've had the books searched myself. There's nothing. You've a satchel of old paper and a made-up name and not one thing the law will honor. My note is real. It's recorded. It's yours. That's heir. How do you know the county has no record? Grace asked. The steps went quiet. It's common knowledge that the record was in the county book 2 nights ago, Grace said. I've a lawyer who saw it there. It's gone now, torn out, the lock broken, the book carried off, and you knew it was gone before I said a word about it. Miss Collins, on a public courthouse step in front of a dozen witnesses and a judge behind that door. Now, how would a woman come to know a record was missing? Grace's voice did not rise. And that was the terrible thing. It stayed soft as milk over iron all the way down. Unless she was the one who had it taken. Victoria's mouth opened. Nothing came out. And the judge, who had come to the top of the stairs at the sound of raised business, on his own steps, a lean old man named Amos Thornberry, who had known Grace's foster father 30 years and owed him nothing but respect, said, "That's a serious charge, Mrs. Harper. Destroying a county record's a crime. You'll not make it on my steps without you can stand behind it." "I can stand behind all of it, Your Honor," Grace said and turned to him. But I don't need the county record to prove what I own, and that's the point I'd ask the court to hear before Miss Collins files one more paper. The trust that grants me this land was drawn 40 years ago. Its original drafts, in the drafting attorney's own hand, witnessed and dated, are in this case. She nodded to Wickham, who lifted it. That's Ezra Wickham, Your Honor. He drew half these trusts himself under my grandmother's lawyer, and he's ridden through the night to bring you the originals. 2 independent records already, one older than the county's. But there's a third. She let it sit one heartbeat, and she watched Victoria's face while she said it, because she'd waited a whole summer to watch Victoria's face while she said it. A sealed lodgment filed with the state in Harrisburg 40 years ago, under seal by my grandmother's lawyer, precisely so that no local mischief, no torn page, no bought clerk, no governor's money could ever unmake this trust. She looked at Victoria. The Commonwealth has held the proof of what I own since before you were born, Miss Collins. You raced me for a record you could destroy. You never knew there was one you couldn't touch. The silence on the courthouse steps was the deepest silence of the whole long summer. Victoria Collins looked at the battered case in the old lawyer's hands, and she looked at Grace and the whole edifice of her cruelty. The note bought in secret, the rumors, the bigamy, the lie, the con she'd painted over the flood, the record torn from the book. Grace watched all of it come down behind Victoria's eyes at once like a dam breaking, exactly the way her father had promised her. A scheme built on a wrong idea always came down. Your Honor? Victoria's Philadelphia lawyer had gone gray, and he was a man who could read a courtroom, and he had just read this one. A word with my client, I think. Judge Thornberry said, Your client has a great deal to explain and not about the trust. A sealed state lodgment settles the ownership. I'll confirm it by wire before the day is out, but I've known Ezra Wickham 40 years, and I've never known him to ride through a night for a forgery. The land is Mrs. Harper's. That's near enough, decided. His old eyes went hard. What's not decided is how the county record came to be torn from its book 2 nights past, and how the plaintiff came to know it was missing before anyone told her. That, Miss Collins, is a matter this court will pursue. Destroying a public record to defraud a landholder isn't a genteel matter to be settled between families. It's a criminal one. Victoria Collins, governor's daughter, who had come up the courthouse steps one signature from owning half a county, stood at the top of them with the whole county watching and understood that she had lost everything. Not just the land, not just Nathaniel, but her name, the one thing her kind valued past money, because a woman charged with a crime does not marry well or move in the parlors that had always opened to her. And the story of how the governor's daughter tore a page from a book to rob a governess would follow her into every one of them for the rest of her life. My father, she began, will. Your father, said Judge Thornberry, holds a note secured against nothing, bought in secret through 3 intermediaries against land. His own agent will now have to explain he knew, or should have known, was never the borrower's to pledge. If I were your father, Miss Collins, I'd be less concerned this evening with saving your marriage prospects than with saving myself from a fraud inquiry. Now take your lawyer and your satchel off my steps. You'll hear from this court, and you'll answer it. It was done that quickly, in the end. A whole summer of cruelty, a whole scheme years in the building, undone in 10 minutes on a courthouse step by a soft-voiced woman with 40-year-old paper and a word Victoria had never known to fear. Victoria Collins went down the steps she'd come up in triumph, and she went down them alone, her lawyer already 3 paces ahead, and putting distance between himself and a client turned liability. And she did not look back because there was nothing behind her now but the ruin of everything she'd staked on a governess being worth nothing. Grace watched her go. She did not gloat. She had never in her life gloated, and she did not start now because she knew what it was to go down a set of stairs with nothing, and she would not have wished the falling on anyone, not even the woman who'd torn a page from a book to rob her. You could hate her? Nathaniel said quietly beside her. God knows you've earned the right. She'd have taken everything and salted the ground behind her. I don't hate her, Grace said. I pity her. She had a governor for a father and money her whole life and every door in the state open to her, and she used it all to try and destroy one woman she thought owned nothing. That's not a person to hate, Nathaniel. That's a person to be glad you're not. She let out a long breath, and with it went the last of the summer, the whole held weight of it. It's over. It's actually over. Not quite, Nathaniel said, and he turned her there on the courthouse steps in the long gold light in front of Judge Thornberry and Ezra Wickham and the clerk and the dozen townsfolk who'd gathered at the sound of business, in front of the same public he'd shamed her before at the altar 3 months gone, and he did the thing he'd promised her in a country lawyer's parlor he would do. I asked you once in the wrong place for the wrong reasons, and I made a ruin of it, he said. So, I'm asking again in the right place, in the open, in front of everyone who watched me be a fool. Grace Vance. Not the contract, not the cover, not the land before God, not the land you can give the whole county away tomorrow and it changes nothing I'm about to say. His voice was steady and it carried, and he did not care who heard it. This proud man who 3 months ago couldn't meet her eyes. I love you. I loved you before I knew what you were, when I still thought you owned nothing but a good gray dress and a level tongue, and that's how I know it's true because I fell for the woman and not the fortune. Marry me, truly this time. Be my wife the way you were always too good to be treated. I'll spend the rest of my life earning what I threw away in one sentence at an altar. He took both her hands. Will you have me, Grace, knowing everything I am and everything I did? And Grace Harper, who had waited 3 years for a reason and 1 whole cruel summer for a man who had built a fortress round her heart brick by brick in cold rooms, and had just that afternoon let it stand open, at last looked at her husband on the courthouse steps and gave him the answer she'd promised he'd not have to wait to be sure of. I already married you, Nathaniel Harper, she said, in a cold church to a man who wouldn't look at me. I've been your wife the whole summer through, every unkind day of it, and I'd have gone under holding your hand sooner than float on anyone's fortune, same as you. Her voice broke finally at the last, and she let it in front of everyone because there was nothing left to guard. Yes, I'll have you. Not the contract, the marriage, the true one. I'll have you. He kissed her then on the courthouse steps in the open, and it was nothing at all like the wedding that had no kiss. It was the whole of the summer paid back in a single moment, and the townsfolk who'd come to watch a foreclosure cheered instead at a marriage. And old Ezra Wickham wept openly into his own case of papers. And Judge Thornberry looked at the two of them and thought that in 40 years on the bench he'd never seen a debt so fully and so rightly repaid. They rode home in the last of the light. Married in law all summer, and married in truth at last, and the county they passed through was already somehow ahead of the news, because a thing like that travels faster than horses. And by the time they reached the Harper gate, the Reeds were waiting in the road and the Websters and half the flooded farms besides, standing along the lane in the dusk to see the mistress who'd fed them come home, the true owner of the ground they lived on. Amos Reed took his hat off. We heard, he said simply. The whole county's heard by now that you owned it all along, that you fed us out of your own hand and never said that the Collins woman's finished. He turned the hat. We come to say, well, we come to say we're glad, ma'am. Gladder than we've got the words for, and that whatever you build here, whatever you mean to do with all that ground, we're your people. You need only ask. And Grace, who had been an orphan in cold rooms, and a governess whispered about in church, and a bride shamed at an altar, sat her horse in the dusk before a whole county of people who called themselves her own, and understood at last what her father had meant all those years ago with his dying breath. Land held quiet, held for the right reason, makes a person free. It had never been about the acres. It had been about this, the power to stand between cruelty and the helpless, and not count the cost. And to be at the end of it not owned by anyone and not owning anyone, but bound to a whole county by the one thing that couldn't be bought or foreclosed, loyalty freely given and freely returned. You're my people, she said, and her voice carried down the lane. And I've plans for this county you'll not believe till you see them. But not tonight. Tonight go home to your families. Tomorrow we start building. And build they did. The years that followed remade the county, and every soul in it knew whose hand had done the remaking. The eastern bottomland, rescued from the brink of foreclosure, was parceled out on terms no bank would ever have dared to offer. Leases stretched long, rents were fair, and a clear path to ownership awaited any family willing to cultivate the soil. For Grace had known the sting of too many cold suppers to ignore the truth. A person who owns their roof is a person no governor's daughter can ever truly ruin. The mill was resurrected, and the toll vanished from the long road within the first week. Grain flowed honestly once more. The low bridge, once swallowed by the flood, was rebuilt higher and fashioned from stone, standing firm for a century. Grace built a school. She built it on Vance land with Vance money, and she stood within its walls herself that first winter, teaching the letters she'd once imparted in chilly rooms for others' coin. Now she offered her knowledge freely to any child in the county, be they farmer's daughter or servant's son. For she had vowed as a girl, no older than Sally, to stand as a shield between a child's mind and a world intent on squandering it. And she possessed the power now, and counted no cost too high. Sally herself, who'd learned her letters on a wedding day in a Harper kitchen, grew up to teach beside her, and Nathaniel, in those years, became the man Grace had spent an entire summer waiting to be certain existed. To the very end of his days, he never spoke of the land as his own. He spoke of it as hers, or as theirs, or most often, simply as the county's. And he wrote of it not as a landlord demanding rents, but as a steward tending something held in trust, because his wife had taught him, in one arduous summer, the profound difference between possessing something and being worthy of it. The pride that had once turned its back at an altar was gone, spent, and buried. In its place stood something far superior, something a proud man rarely learns in time: gratitude, plain, daily, and unashamed. Victoria Collins left the county within the year. The fraud inquiry did not land her in prison. A governor's money reached far enough to prevent that. But it did something her kind feared more than incarceration. It followed her. The tale of the governor's daughter who tore a page from a book to defraud a governess preceded her into every parlor in the state, and the doors that had always swung open for her began, one by one, to close. Eventually, she married a widower in another county, a man who did not yet know the story, and she was not happy. Years later, when Grace heard of it, she said only, "I hope she found some peace." It's a hard thing to have staked everything on being better than someone, only to learn you never were. And she meant it. It was a measure of how far she had come from the cold-eyed girl who had folded her hands at an altar, vowing to save the man who had shamed her. They had children, 3 of them, and Grace raised them to know the whole story, the true one, unsoftened. How their mother had owned half the county and allowed their father to shame her at an altar rather than claim an ugly victory. And how she had waited a whole summer to understand him before she relinquished the very thing her own father had died protecting. "I tell you so you'll know," she told them, "that the worth of a person is never in what they own, or what they wear, or what a church whispers about them. Your father was the richest man in the county, and worth nothing the day I married him, and worth everything the day he chose me, not knowing I owned the ground he stood on. Money bought and sold makes a person cruel. But the right thing done, when you believe it will cost you everything, that's the only fortune worth having. Your grandfather taught me that. Now I've taught you." Nathaniel lived to be an old man. Near the end, he sat on the porch of the house that had been hers, and not hers, and was now, beyond question, theirs. He took her hand, the same hand he had kissed in a country lawyer's parlor the day his whole world had turned over, and he spoke the words he had spent 30 years learning how to say. "I've been thinking on inheritances," he said, "on what a man leaves. My father left me a name and a mountain of debt, and nearly buried me under both. Your father left you half a county and made you swear to spend it well." He turned her hand over in his. "But the greatest inheritance I ever came into wasn't the land, Grace. It was never the land. It was you, a woman I very nearly failed to see standing right in front of me in a borrowed dress, worth more than every acre in the state. And I almost let my pride throw you away in a single sentence at an altar. His voice was old, steady, and sure. I've spent a lifetime being grateful I looked twice. It's the only wise thing I ever did. Everything good in my whole life came of that one moment I finally turned my head and met your eyes. And Grace Harper, Grace Vance, who had been an orphan and a governess and a shamed bride, and had become, through her own patience, her own strength, and her refusal to buy an easy victory at the price of a true one, the most respected woman in the county and the freest, looked at the man she had tested, saved, and married in truth. And she gave him the last word, the one that closed the whole long account between them. And she gave it plainly, because plain truth was the only currency she had ever truly dealt in. "You were worth waiting for," she said. "I knew it before you did. I knew it the summer I owned everything and let you keep your pride, because I was reading a man to the bottom of his soul, and what I found there was worth the whole of what I'd been given to protect. I didn't save this county with land, Nathaniel. I saved it with patience and with mercy, and with the refusal to become cruel in the winning. And I'd do every hard day of it again. The altar, the whispers, the flood, the waiting to sit here now on this porch with you, an old woman who owns everything and is owned by no one, and knows, past any doubt, that the one thing she chose to give her heart to was the one thing in all the world that was worth it, and it was. To the last day of both their lives, and in the memory of a whole county for 100 years after, it was worth it, every bit, and no one who knew the story ever once doubted it.